If you go into a Lamborghini dealership to customize a car of your own, they'll have you sitting at this desk. Now, a desk is a desk, but I think we can all agree that that piece of IKEA furniture doesn't match the Lamborghini vibe. So naturally, as someone who makes furniture, I spent over $1,500 on materials, and we're making Lamborghini a desk, because theirs is kinda lame. Or at least hopefully, because the biggest challenge of this project isn't the build itself. I've made many arguably more complicated things. It's that Lamborghini isn't actually my client. Yet. So at this point, you could say that I'm just building and hoping they like it and want to buy it from me. Which means that our goals for this build isn't just to build a really cool desk, but also to get Lamborghini to somehow notice it, which might be more difficult than I originally thought. But fortunately, we are going off of more than just hope, and there's actually two semi-rational reasons I would just spend that much money without a guaranteed client. The first and best of these reasons is that I actually have a contact inside of my local Lamborghini dealership. For our intents and purposes, we'll call him Phil, and he gave me 3 criteria that will help my desk get accepted by Lamborghini. But we'll get back to those in a minute, because the second reason I spent all this money is because of you and what you're doing right now. That being, watching things on social media. And my plan was to make a short form series for the build that would hopefully get enough attention for Lamborghini to see it. Anyways, in terms of the actual build, all I've really done so far is cut all the lumber down to size so that I can glue it together. And I did all that with a track saw because I don't have a miter saw readily available to me. Now to actually hold everything flat while I'm gluing it together, I'm using a biscuit joiner, which is what you just saw me use right there. I realized while I was jointing this piece that I didn't have enough biscuits, so I bought more and I bought the wrong size, but these should still work. Now if it didn't make it clear, the biscuits are those little pieces of wood that slot into the slots that we made, holding everything flat. And while I'm gluing this all up, let's jump back to Phil and the 3 criteria that he gave me. The first of which is that the desk needs to be simple. Now that doesn't mean simple in that there's nothing going on, but it's more of a simple in that there's not way too much going on. Because obviously, we don't want to distract from people's Lamborghini buying experience. We want to enhance it. Considering this, my design, which you'll see after I reveal all 3 criteria, is a good balance of not being too discreet or too flashy. And if that's not the case, I'm sure you all will let me know. That took 25 minutes, but I think we're finally good enough. It's the next day and the glue is all dry. But now I gotta put this on a table somehow. Tying into the first criteria, the second, which will also help keep the desk a little bit more discreet, is that the desk pretty much needs to be grayscale. This is because the rest of the room which the desk will go in, if Lamborghini does decide to buy it, is pretty much just black, white, and gray. So we need to do our best to mimic that with the build, which, after my mom and I had got it flipped over, had all these tiny little glue spots that I had to get rid of with this scraper you're seeing me use here. At this point, I had also fully filmed and edited the very first short of the series, which Lamborghini never ended up responding to, but it's good progress. With this all done and cleaned up, we can take it to get belt sanded, but while that's happening, now to make the legs, we gotta cut this 2.5 inch thick material to these lengths. Now I guess I didn't realize that that would mean absolutely nothing to everybody watching, but essentially we're just making trapezoid shaped legs. And just as a side note, if you're wondering why my saw keeps burning everything that I'm cutting, it's because I have the speed setting on too high. Now I didn't figure that out till later, but you'll never see any of this on the final piece. I forgot to account for the thickness of this, so now I gotta cut another 5 inches off of both of these. Well, luckily that fix was pretty easy, but while I was fixing it, I wanted to give you a prime example of what not to do with a track saw, or any saw for that matter. That's better. With that fix aside, our third and final criteria is that the desk needs to have subtle wood grain. And if you have no clue what that means, here's an example of an aggressive wood grain and a subtle wood grain. Hard maple, which we're using here, has a more subtle grain, which is obviously why we're using it. And there's 2 main reasons for this. The first of which is that in the dealership, there really isn't any wood furniture, which means that ours will stand out way too much if the grain is too aggressive. And the second is kind of the same, and it's that an aggressive grain stands out pretty much anywhere, so we definitely don't want one in this circumstance. So with all that out of the way, here's the design I came up with. It's simple, but I think it'll be perfect for the dealership. I'll also show you a colorized version of it later, but for now you're gonna have to wait. For a little recap on our progress, so far we've glued up our tabletop, sent it off to get belt sanded, and started working on our legs. And with a better look at them, you can see that this is the part that we're gluing up right now. And to do that, I took these little cutoffs from earlier so that I would be able to clamp the piece at a perfect 90 degrees. If I didn't do this, the clamps would apply uneven pressure to the piece, making the legs all wonky. Now, a very valid question that you might be asking yourself is how the heck did this kid get a contact at Lamborghini? And the answer to that is kinda simple, but also not. Because last year I made my first video and it was on this desk, which I also didn't have a client for, and was also Lamborghini inspired. Not having a client for a car inspired piece of furniture, the obvious place to go was car shows, and so I started going to a few of those a month. Now kinda ironically, I never actually sold the desk from there. A guy from Facebook Marketplace reached out and I sold it to him. Now I don't know who goes on Facebook Marketplace to buy a $7,500 desk, which is what I ended up selling that for, so that man was definitely godsent, and for those who are always wondering, that's how I'm able to afford all of these Festool tools. And I'm just as disappointed as you to find out that I'm not a trust fund baby, but maybe one day. Now, it was at one of these car shows that I first talked to Lamborghini of Sarasota, which I probably should have mentioned earlier. Is my local dealership that I'm trying to get my desk into. I'm not necessarily trying to replace all their desks because I like making one-off furniture. Now the first time I talked to them, I got pretty much the same response I got from other people, which was a, "Oh cool, good luck bud." But the more car shows I went to, the more I started seeing the same people, and over time I got a few hints as to how I should make this desk, which you already know about. And big thanks to the people at Lamborghini because they were always super nice to me, even though I obviously wasn't there to buy a car. The legs are looking all nice and nice, but I decided that they need an edge profile. So we're going to be putting a 45-degree chamfer on the sides, but not with this bit. I'm scared of it. With this here little guy. This one I will have to use later though, so not looking forward to that. Now I was scared of this because at this time I had just got the router, and this thing weighs like 10 pounds, so on an awkward shape like the table legs, I really thought I was going to mess something up. And no spoilers, but that doesn't come till later. And I guess that's kind of not true because I really wasn't supposed to route this top piece that you're watching me route right now, but that quite literally affects nothing, so I didn't count it. Not so fortunate with my mistake later though. Anyways, while I was yapping earlier, all I essentially did was cut the legs so they would sit evenly on the floor. And while I was doing that, I made the impromptu decision that I was going to put this 45-degree chamfer on the legs, and I really think it looks better. After that, with possibly the worst transition in this video, I put these end pieces on to make the legs a full trapezoid. On the bright side, there's only better transitions to come. The tabletop is now back from the CNC and it looks immaculate. I actually couldn't be more happy with it. But now we gotta make it pop, and I'm gonna do that by filling it with some epoxy. The first step to doing that involves this professional woodworking device, also known as a hot glue gun. Now I'm not cool enough to have the really professional Ryobi hot glue gun, but maybe one day I'll get to that level. Now you're probably wondering where all these letters mystically magically came from, and I'll explain. Essentially, when I took it to go get belt sanded, that only took like an hour. I then took it up to the CNC shop to get the letters ad personam engraved into it. I just didn't feel like explaining all that earlier, so yeah. What does ad personam mean, you ask? Well, it's Latin that loosely translates to for the person or in person, which I was kind of surprised about because I thought they would have some Italian phrase, being Italian. But ad personam in terms of Lamborghini is their car customization program. And you can see this phrase on the wall of the room that this desk might live in, so I thought it was quite fitting. And after getting all the letters sealed off with epoxy, we can now start the larger pour, which will fill all the letters solid black. If we didn't seal the letters first, then the black dye that we're going to use here in a second would end up staining the wood all around it, which would look really messy, and I'm not giving that to Lamborghini, or anyone for that matter. I've done a lot of epoxy pours, at least in correlation to the amount of time that I've been woodworking, and never before have I actually used a high quality resin, like I'm doing here. Or I guess high quality might not be the right word, but just a main brand epoxy. I normally just use some cheap epoxy from Amazon because I found a brand that I really like, but they stopped selling it, so I gave in. But I'm not really mad about it because this super clear stuff worked really well. I am a little bit mad about the price tag though, because only a gallon and a half of it costs $75 on like a 50% sale. And speaking of cost, you probably want to know how much I spent on this whole build, because $1,500 was just the base amount that I spent, and we'll talk about that a little bit later, but for right now I want to talk about how annoying this stuff was to sand off, because even with 80 grit, just one side took me like an hour and a half, and when you're just doing one motion the whole time, that gets repetitive really quick. Look how good all of that turned out. Yeah, I was quite happy with this considering I had never done anything like it before. With this done, we can actually start working on the fun stuff, starting with cutting this piece to size, but it's a little more complicated than that. And with that, I had also finished our second short of the build, so we're making good progress, even though Lamborghini never responded to that one either. But I'm definitely not losing hope. What did make me lose hope, however, was my power, which kept cutting out, and that's why I keep stopping. Now, I did end up finding a fix for this later, but I definitely lost a little bit of sanity first. Now, in terms of cutting this piece to size, the whole thing is oversized at least 2 inches in width and in length. So right here, I'm cutting the whole thing to width, but when we start cutting it to length, it gets a little more difficult. Or at least it was for me, because I've never done anything like this before. That being cutting out a more intricate edge profile on a table. I, like most people, normally just stick with rectangles, but on this project, the desk has a distinct front and back, based roughly on shapes that I saw on the front and back of a Lamborghini. So we gotta cut both of those out, and I decided to start with the more complicated rear end of the desk. Now to actually do that, I use this little stop block piece for my saw that will stop the saw before it cuts too far into the desk, which would make me have to redo the whole thing. Not the whole desk, of course, but just the whole edge profile. Now doing these little cuts is definitely the hardest, and I actually failed the first time, so I had to come back, and it took a lot more than 2 attempts if I'm gonna be honest, but we got it in the end. But since the blade of the saw is round, it leaves a little bit of material that we have to come back and get rid of with the Japanese pull saw. This is one of the most helpful tools to have around the shop, and it comes in handy quite a bit, but that definitely doesn't mean that I'm good at using it, as you'll see coming up. Pivoting back to my YouTube Shorts plan, it's about here that I realized how stupid I was, because every good piece of short form content needs a good hook to stop the viewers from scrolling. And what did I decide to make my hook? Building Lamborghini a desk because theirs sucks. Yeah, insulting the very people I'm trying to get to buy a desk from me. Probably not my smartest move. But even more dumb than that was the very fact that I kept that as the intro for the whole entire series. That's right, all 5 parts. And it's definitely one of those things that you look back on and you're like, wow, this guy's dumb. But on the bright side, our table turned out really good, and I didn't mess up any of the cuts, even though the ones on the second side were really easy. Cutting those 2 sides out were a lot easier than I thought they'd be, but I have this to do now, and I'm scared. But that doesn't matter, let's do it anyways. I was scared of this mostly just because I've never used a router bit this big. Now one thing you might not know about big router bits is that you actually want to run them at a slower speed than small bits. And that's because of this, which you can pause and read if you want, but essentially you don't want to spin this thing faster than 12,000 RPMs, which is about a 2 setting on my router. Now a little bit after this clip that you're watching, I made a test piece, but before that I had a different router bit in the router. And it was a small bit, so I had the router on a 5-speed set, which is about 20,000 RPM. Now you already know where this is going, but on my test piece I ended up using the router bit at 8,000 RPMs higher than you're supposed to, which very well could have ended with the car-fed blades essentially blowing up. So, glad that didn't happen. What did happen, however, is my power continuing to cut out. This was frustrating, so I decided not to film and just do everything with a transition. But the build was going too well, so here's where things start to go wrong. So I was routing and I was going to do the final pass after like an hour because my power keeps shutting off, but this little lever here slipped, I guess, and came loose at some point. So I pushed it down to do the final pass, and I guess I get to learn how to do patchwork now, so that's the light. Now there are 2 options that I know of to fix this, and the first is to cut the whole table an inch shorter on both sides, and we're obviously not doing that. The second, which I mentioned earlier, is patchwork. And if you don't know what that is, essentially, you take a block of wood like the one I'm putting down right here and carve out an area that's the exact size of it. And if you do it right, the block fits perfectly into the recess that you created, making, if you chose a similar enough looking piece of wood, a fill that is essentially invisible. Now, I'm definitely not making any promises of that because I've never done this before, but it should be a lot better than making the table 2 inches shorter than I planned it to be. And this test fit right here went really well. Now that we're almost halfway through the video, I realized I really haven't given you any time to watch me build anything without me yapping, so here you go. Alright, I'm back, and now with this whole area cleared out, we can finally glue our little block in place. Now, if I'm being honest, am I completely happy with how this turned out? Not entirely. Since my router bits didn't fit in there, I couldn't cut it perfectly square, and doing it by hand, I also didn't make it perfectly square. Now, I could call this human error, but in reality it was just kind of a skill issue. But anyways, like half an hour later, this thing was completely dry, and I could use my Japanese pole saw to start cutting off the excess. And this is where, as I alluded to earlier, I have a bit of a skill issue moment with the pole saw as well. Not right here though, this cut turned out really well, especially considering the fact that that whole face is going to get another pass with the router. But this one was definitely not the same, and the flush cut saw did in fact not cut flush. Now again, this is completely my fault. I should have cut 50% one way and 50% the other way like I did on the other cut. But that pretty obviously didn't happen, and I just kept on my merry way. Now luckily that is on the bottom side of the desk, so I can just sand it out and you'll literally never notice it, but it still sucks. And it was also strike 2 of 3 of mistakes that I made with the router. The last one happening while I was working on the tabletop, which you're seeing me work on right now. I also just realized that I never showed you the full edge profile that I'm going to put on this build. So here it is. It's 45 degrees on both the top and the bottom, with 2/3 of the 45-degree angle being on the bottom and 1/3 on the top. That is, if we ever get it done, because strike 3 was quite literally me shoving my router into the piece of wood instead of moving it gently like I should have been. This is the least of the 3 mistakes because once I glue it, you'll never actually see it in the final piece, but after a job that should have taken an hour had already taken like 6, that was just extremely annoying. But after sanding all the excess glue off so that there was nothing for my router to catch on, I could finally route this last little piece and finally be done, which I was a little happy about. With our desk's shape all shape, yeah, so I completely messed up the camera work here because I am not a cameraman. Sorry about that. I guess you're just gonna have to deal with it. It's time to actually mount the legs, which we're gonna be doing with these mounting plates that I made. And to actually cut out the area for our mounting plates, I'm going to be using some super glue and tape that will allow me to create a perimeter that I can then route out. Now, before I explain in a lot more detail what I mean by that, we have more progress on our shorts conquest. That's right, we finished the 3rd short. Still, no response from Lamborghini, but a ton of people are tagging them, and I'm hopeful that they'll see it. Now, if you don't know what I'm doing here, that would make sense considering that I did a pretty terrible job explaining it. But essentially what we're doing is creating a recess on the bottom of the desk that's the same size as the mounting plate, so that the mounting plate has a nice place to slot into. Kinda like this clip right here. But anyways, all I've done so far is mark out the area for the mounting plates with the mounting plates themselves, because I didn't have anything of the same size. As you also saw, my router didn't fit across this huge gap, so I made this little plexiglass template that worked really well. My goal here was to carve out about 1/2 inch of material so that the mounting plates have a place to go into, but they'll still stick out just a little bit. While I was doing this, there were 2 main things that I had to worry about. The first was not accidentally routing into the side of the template, so I had to create a little edge like you're seeing me do here. And the second was, since I'm removing the whole 1/2 inch of material at the same time, not putting too much pressure on the bit. And that meant that I had to go really slow, and I think this one side took me an hour and a half before I could come back with a flush trim bit to make our cutout completely square. This process also created a lot of confetti to celebrate the fact that we're pretty much done using the router, meaning the chances that I mess something up in the future is quite a bit lower, but definitely still a possibility. Just like magic, this second one is also done, and these things fit pretty much perfectly. Now, I know people people are going to be angry that those don't fit all the way in, but I designed it to be that way on purpose, and if it wasn't like that, this next step would probably result in me drilling a hole through the tabletop, and we don't want that. Well, I guess maybe somebody wants to see that, but that doesn't happen, so too bad. Anyways, we have our mounting plates and we made them a little home, but now we need a way to actually mount our mounting plates. And to do that, I'm using threaded inserts which screw into the holes we made and have thread on the inside that allows a screw, like you'll see coming up here in a second, to screw into it. While I'm doing that, I want to fulfill my promise of talking about what this thing cost me to build. The largest single expense of this project was obviously the lumber, which was $1,100, so I guess even trees feel the need to rob you these days. Next up is an undisclosed expense, which you'll see later, of $425, and these two things made up the initial $1,500 that I stated at the beginning. The CNC work was $250, which I think is really fair. The epoxy, like I said, was $75. Hardware for the desk was like $50. All the router bits I used were another $100, and everything else that I used was probably about another $500. I just don't have time to list all that. That means that my estimate for how much I spent is probably over $2,500, and that's kind of on the low end. And even with that, my goal here isn't to price gouge Lamborghini and take all the money I can from them, it's to make them a desk that's better than the one that they have, which I won't lie is a pretty easy task considering what they have now, but don't forget our second goal of actually getting Lamborghini to notice it. And now that you have that knowledge, I also want to know what you think is a fair price for this desk, because what I'm thinking to ask them for this desk, if we ever get to that point, might actually be lower than what you're thinking. Or not, I can't read your mind. Now, in the spirit of fulfilling promises, I also said that I would show you later a colorized version of the build, and so here it is. It has a bleach white tabletop, black racing stripes, and black legs, which is why I'm staining them black with some India ink right here. And it's pretty simple, but that's, how it's supposed to be, and it also fulfills the criteria of being grayscale, matching the rest of the room. Staining all this black also on the hard maple pretty much gets rid of the wood grain, fulfilling our criteria of a subtle wood grain. So it's a win-win-win. Now, if my voice was too therapeutic for you and you couldn't focus on what I was actually doing in the video, here's a little recap of what happened while I was yapping. First, I tested our mounting plates, and since they fit, I screwed our mounting plates onto the actual legs themselves. With that on, I flipped the legs over and screwed in some leg rollers, just in case Lamborghini's floor is uneven, or I made the legs not perfectly square. But we all know they're square. And lastly, I dyed the legs black with India ink along with the recesses that the legs fit into before putting a coat of finish on them, which you're seeing me do right here. The coat of finish isn't really necessary, but it'll give the legs a nice even sheen and help them tie in with the tabletop. That is, once we get the racing stripes in. Now, pretty obviously, you can't have the legs done without giving them a test fit and flipping the tabletop over, so that's what I'm doing right here. And it looks like all of our threaded insert points fit perfectly, so that's nice. Also, despite this tabletop being solid hard maple, this thing is pretty light and easy to move. Now that the desk legs are done, and in my opinion looking really good, we actually have to flip the table back over and take the legs off, because there's still a lot of important work to do to the tabletop, starting with a pretty exciting step. And that exciting step involves our undisclosed purchase of $425 from earlier. The first part of which is this $85 genuine Lamborghini rear emblem. And I don't know if it's just me, but $85 seems kind of cheap, at least for that. Next up, and significantly more importantly, is this $325 genuine front hood emblem. Now, I don't know if you can tell on camera, but both of these are just plastic, and you could definitely argue that $425 is a lot for some plastic. But I think that having genuine Lamborghini parts on the table is worth more than that. Now, before I keep talking about this, when we flipped the table over, I actually finished the fourth short. So, more progress there, and more people tagging Lamborghini. Now, on actual Lamborghinis, these emblems are inlaid into the metal, so that's what we're doing here, just with wood instead of metal. Now, I have actually done this exact same thing one time before in my first ever video, but back then, I didn't have this really nice router, I had this tiny rigid one. And also, unlike then, I got this first try instead of it taking 10. So I guess we made progress on all accounts, which is nice to see. The rear emblem was a lot easier to do, because we're just drilling 2 holes for these 2 tiny points that are on the back of the emblem. Now, I don't know if this is a spoiler at all, but when I posted the 5th short, which has this exact footage that you're watching now, people were really mad that I didn't inlay this back emblem too. And there's 2 reasons for that. The first of which is that I'm not Michelangelo. Like, I don't know who they think I am that I can just carve that perfectly into the wood. Secondly, that's just not how it is in the cars. The front emblem is inlaid, but this back one isn't. So naturally, I didn't even think about it. It's finally time to get this whole tabletop all bleached up and white, starting with part A here. Now, if you forgot why we're bleaching this, essentially we need the table to be grayscale, meaning we need this wood to be white, and as you can see right now, it isn't. Hard maple has a little bit more red than I'm looking for, so this should take it away pretty easily, and you'll see why the keyword there is should a little bit later. Now, this is a 2-part product with a part A and a part B. Part A is a solution of sodium hydroxide that essentially sets the pigment in the wood into a vulnerable state. After that sits on the wood for 10 minutes, the part B, which is hydrogen peroxide, can then come in and break down the pigments, which turns the piece white. And you can actually see this process happening in real time. But the next day, when I went to look at it, it turned out not that good at all. I was really trying to hold on to hope with this one, but this comes back to hurt me later. And if you can't really see the problem, it's that it turned out really splotchy. So my fix to this was using some white stain. And this right here I deserve to be bullied for, because I wasn't paying attention and I poured water into an oil-based finish, and obviously water and oil don't mix, so I had to sit there with this rag looking like an idiot. I give you full permission to leave a hate comment for that one. But while you're down there, and since we're over 25 minutes into this video now, I feel like I have the moral and ethical right to ask you to leave a like on the video. And since you're already there, you might as well subscribe because things are only getting better. It's finally time for the racing stripes. Now, if you don't believe me that things are getting better, just look at this chart. We're right here, and that's where we're gonna be, so just subscribe already. Anyways, shameful plug aside, this part is, in my opinion, really cool, because we're taking this thicker tape, which is meant to be used to hang things on the wall, and we're creating a barrier with it. Now, this tape, unlike if I just use normal masking tape, doesn't let any of the liquid through, which means that as long as I press the tape down properly and laid it in a nice straight line, it should reveal a perfect line when we peel it up. Just like the legs, I stained this with India ink, and to get a nice even look, I'm sanding it down with this marine pad, which is the equivalent of a 320 grit piece of sandpaper. Now, when I sand this, it creates a bunch of tiny black dust that, if it got onto our white wood, would completely smear it, looking terrible. So to stop that from happening, I put a layer of finish on it in this state so that it would lock in the black dust. And lastly, and most annoyingly, you have to peel up this tape, which is a painstaking process. And if you don't peel it up the same exact day that you put it down, it's gonna take twice as long to peel up. The results, however, make this well worth it, because look just how good that line comes out. But, and I'm not just trying to retention farm when I say this, that might not matter, as you'll see in a minute. But for the time being, ignorance was bliss, and I enjoyed it. That turned out like perfect. And just like that, the bottom stripes are also done, but it turns out I kind of screwed myself. Yeah, you knew that was coming, but the way I did this actually left this huge visible lip, which if I tried to sand off would once again smudge everything, looking terrible. This left me with essentially only one option, which was to tape off the stripes and then finish the white part, and then tape off the white part and finish the stripes, doing everything individually, so pretty much the most annoying way possible. And so that's what I did, hoping, or what I now know to be coping, that this would work. Cause if it didn't, then I would have to re-sand off all the bleached wood and all the stripes and do that over again, and that's definitely not what I wanted to do. But most of the time in life, the thing you don't want to do is what you should do, or at least what you'll end up doing. This finish turned out absolutely horrible, but luckily there is a fix. It just involves this tiny little brush. And I'm not going to make you watch that, so 5 days later, I finally got it looking how I want, and as you can see, I had to make a little bit of a pivot. Now, I don't know why I just decided to lie to you there, because using the natural wood instead of bleach wood is a pretty big pivot, especially this late in the project. But why did I make this change even when it defies our criteria of keeping the desk grayscale? Well, in the end, the 3 criteria given to me were just suggestions to help my table get accepted. But in the end, I think it's important not just to have a table that meets some certain criteria, but to have a really nice final product that I can be proud of and know other people are gonna like as well. There's no point in making something I think looks bad to appease someone that isn't even my client, at least at that specific point in time. And it's not like I didn't try to stick to that criteria. I spent 4 days trying to do so, first spending hours on small touch-ups with white stain, then sanding all of that off and re-bleaching the whole thing, before sanding off all the bleach and all the stripes so that I could make this again with the natural wood. I tried my best, but honestly, this is the best outcome I could come up with, and I'm really happy about it. Because for one, that white wood looked extremely lifeless and dull in comparison to this, and second, I think that the natural wood almost always looks better than putting some product on it. So I decided to do what I knew would be best instead of doing what might get me the most brownie points or would have been the easiest thing to do. I'm sorry if that was too inspirational for a woodworking video, but it's over, and this build is almost finished too. And yes, this table has a bit of a tan line, but that allows you to see just how much worse the white wood looks than the not bleached wood. And for those who are going to complain about it, how many times have you looked under someone else's table? Yeah, that's right, never. Now if you're wondering how I solved the issue of smudging with the racing stripes, the solution was actually really simple. All I had to do was just be very intentional with the way that I wiped off the dust, making sure that my rack was clean and that I was always moving diagonally. And just like that, the lip was gone. But that doesn't matter now because we're on the very final step of the build, installing the emblems, starting of course with the rear of the desk. Now for both of these, I'm just using a little bit of liquid nails, which right here I'm now cleaning up so that I never have to worry about these things falling out or moving in the future. In the very final step of the build, after over a month of work, a whole lot of editing, and numerous setbacks as well as new skills learned, was to lay down one last bit of liquid nails, set the emblem in place, and finally, the build was complete. But as you know, that was only half of our goal. We built a really cool desk, but Lamborghini never noticed it. Though discouraged, I still edited up the face short and posted it, completing my plan to reach Lamborghini, but even though thousands of people were tagging them and following along for the journey, Lamborghini never responded. Hey! Oh, I forgot about you. So immediately, I grabbed my phone and started texting Phil, with the hopes that maybe he could find a way to help me out. And he messaged me back saying that he thought the desk was sweet, but that he'd have to ask corporate if it's something they could buy. And so 3 weeks later, that's the last thing I heard. Also, I'm recording this on my phone, so I had used my calculator for that transition. Just don't worry about that. But anyways, the build is done. I have the video that you're watching right now completely done, which took forever, by the way. I have the thumbnail all made. Sorry for the clickbait. Well, I guess I'm not really sorry because you're here, so you clearly enjoyed it. So I guess it's technically a good thing that I clickbaited you, but that might just be me gaslighting you, so I don't know. And also, if you can't tell, this thing takes up, like, pretty much the whole of the garage. So the longer this is here, the less videos I can make for you all. All that is to say is that I gotta upload this video, which means that we failed our second goal of getting this desk to Lamborghini. Now, failing does suck, but I think that especially with this video, Lamborghini has a really good chance of seeing and maybe wanting to buy this desk. So subscribe to see that. And for right now, here's the final version of the desk. You're not quite done with me yapping yet, because I'm sure many of you want to know how much am I going to charge Lamborghini for this desk if they do decide to buy it. And the answer to that question is $4,500, which would be the equivalent of $2,000 for about a month and a half of work. So not very good for me, but making the most money possible was never the goal for this build. And if you're not Lamborghini and you want to buy this thing from me, you can message me over on Instagram right here, but the price for you will be $6,000 because obviously you're not Lamborghini, and I still think that's a fair price. Lastly, if you want to keep watching me build things, you can click the video somewhere on screen. Hope you have a good day, and I hope to see you for the install. Goodbye.